Citizens of the United States, this is a public service announcement on the dangers of identity theft. Please stay tuned for the following information.
Hi, my name's Carl and I'm an expert on identity theft. Identity theft refers to when someone steals your personal information and pretends to be you, so to speak. It can happen when you leave too much personal information on the internet, when you have a weak password that can be easily decrypted, when you don't use varying passwords, which results in the hacker having access to your full personal information, or when you simply drop your wallet or your credit card in the street and a hacker, not even a hacker, just someone picks it up and uses it to pretend that they're you. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of tips and statistics so you can avoid being another victim of identity theft. Now remember, the most important thing to know about identity theft is that it can happen to anyone. Ask Malcolm Bird. On March 9th of 2003, Malcolm Bird was sitting at home with his two children when he heard a knock at the door. He went over, opened the door, and he was met with a warrant for his arrest on the grounds of cocaine possession with intent to distribute. Now, Malcolm had never dealt drugs, but this seemed oddly familiar to him, so he went to the station and tried to clear his name. He spent a few nights in prison before he was released, and they realized that he was not the drug dealer. Now, Malcolm suffered from identity theft, but for him, this wasn't the first instance. It's been going on for several years, because in 1998, a man was brought in on drug dealing and said his name was Malcolm Bird. The real Malcolm Bird went into the local station and cleared his name, but that did not excuse him from the onslaught of fake police charges that would follow him from that point. Later on, he was met with a warrant for his arrest as he was caught speeding. The police officer came up to his car and was going to give him a speeding ticket, but once he realized his name was Malcolm Bird, he said, "You've been charged with drug dealing and intent to distribute drugs." So he was brought into the station, he had to clear his name once again, and he was let go eventually. But after seeing that he'd spent time in prison, he lost his part-time job as a nursing assistant for his criminal record. Later on, he was fired from his full job, and as he tried to get unemployment benefits, he was denied because he had a criminal record. Although the worst thing he'd done was get a speeding ticket. Later on, he lost his license twice for suspected crimes that he did not commit. And despite continually telling the police and proving that he was not the person that he was being charged with the crimes of, they would not listen. So Mr. Bird continually faced charges on behalf of another individual. So now that you know the dangers of identity theft, I'm going to give you a couple of statistics just to let you know how real the threat is. Roughly 15 million Americans suffer from identity theft on a yearly basis. Their monetary losses can reach up to $50 billion. About 100 million United States citizens are faced with the risk of identity theft yearly when database records are stolen from the government and major corporations. Now that you're sufficiently worried, I'm going to give you some tips on how to avoid people stealing your identity. Number 1, avoid releasing any personal information on the internet. I know it may be hard to do, but you have to try to avoid it at all costs. Even your name or the name of a pet or a family friend or your date of birth can be used to try to figure out passwords and break into your accounts. And while we're talking about passwords, make sure that you create strong passwords for your important accounts. That way hackers can't easily break in or easily decrypt your password. Next up, create varying passwords for your multiple accounts. That way if they crack one of your passwords, they don't have access to all of your personal information and accounts. Next up, you want to make sure you don't drop items of identification like your wallet, which would contain your credit card and social security number, driver's license. It may seem like a stupid thing to say, but people do it, and it's the easiest way for someone to steal your identity. Alright, now you're going to want to avoid visiting suspect websites. You'll always be able to tell whether a site is legitimate based on its URL. Now, some have lock icons and HTTPS beginnings to the URL, which definitely tells you that the website's safe, but sometimes it's hard to notice. It may be a change in letter, like going from YouTube to YouTube with 2 O's, or youtube.com going to youtube.net. But you want to be vigilant for that and make sure that you don't click on anything on those websites, because it can easily lead to the installation of malware and worse. So I want you to use these tips I've given you to avoid identity theft. And I know it might not seem like a threat to you, but remember, it can happen to anyone. Ask Malcolm Bird.
This has been a public service announcement on identity theft. We will now return you to your scheduled broadcasts.